In October of 1853, a 19-year-old plantation daughter named Eleanor Harrow did something that shattered every rule of Mississippi society. She vanished in the middle of the night, and the only person missing with her was her father's enslaved man, Jonas, a quiet 24-year-old field hand known for never speaking more than necessary. Witnesses claimed they saw two silhouettes riding north, one horse stolen, one lantern swinging wildly, and a trail of boot prints beside bare feet. Within 3 days, the Harrow family placed a $2,000 bounty on Jonas, a number so outrageous it ignited rumors that had nothing to do with runaway slaves, and everything to do with what Eleanor had stolen before she fled. By the 6th month, in a remote snow-covered town outside Cincinnati, a discovery was made, one so disturbing that local newspapers refused to print the details. What the citizens found in that abandoned cabin became the subject of 4 separate investigations, 3 contradictory testimonies, and 1 sealed county record. White society whispered one explanation. The Harrow family insisted on another. But none of them knew the real truth, not the truth Eleanor took with her into the freezing woods that final night, and not the truth Jonas carried in silence. Before we uncover the disturbing truth, subscribe, hit that bell, and comment your state below. Now, let me take you back to where it all began. In the fading light of an October evening in 1853, the Harrow plantation looked less like an estate and more like the memory of one. The cotton fields, once the pride of Charles Harrow, hung in thin, exhausted rows, their boles sparse and brittle, rattling in the breeze like the hollow bones of some dying creature. The soil had grown stubborn over the years, resisting labor, resisting fertilizer, resisting the endless lash of ambition that men like Charles believed would bend nature to their will. It did not. And everyone on that land, white or enslaved, felt the weight of something ending. Spanish moss clung to the live oaks, swaying like funereal drapery as the wind picked up. The last of the day's warmth bled out of the earth, and the scent of dried grass, wood smoke, and river mud drifted through the air. Across the yard, lanterns flickered to life along the veranda, though half of them sputtered, nearly out of oil. Charles Harrow claimed the shortages were temporary. Everyone else knew the truth. The Harrow family was slipping and slipping fast. Eleanor Harrow stood on the upper balcony, hands resting lightly on the railing, watching the horizon swallow the sun. 19 years old, slender, pale from too many hours indoors, she had the posture of a young woman trained to be silent and agreeable. But her eyes, sharp, restless, faintly troubled, betrayed a mind that wandered far beyond this place. She noticed things. Too many things, her father often hissed. Her hair, pinned with unnecessary precision, caught the amber light of dusk as she leaned forward. Below, the enslaved workers were finishing the last tasks of the evening, tying down wagons, shuttering windows, hauling tools into the shed. Among them she saw Jonas. He moved differently from the others, quiet, deliberate, every step calculated, as though he measured the earth before trusting it. Jonas carried a wooden crate on his shoulder, the muscles in his arms tightening beneath his worn shirt, though his expression never changed. His face held a solemn discipline, a self-forged armor that neither overseer's nor Harrow's temper could penetrate. Many men on the plantation feared Harrow. Jonas did not fear him. But he feared something else, something Eleanor had sensed long before she understood why. She watched Jonas pause, shifting his grip on the crate. The overseer, Finch, barked an order behind him. "Move it inside. Master wants those locked up before full dark." Jonas didn't answer. He never wasted words. He carried the crate toward the study side entrance, the one Harrow kept locked with iron bolts during the day and triple-barred at night. Eleanor's brow furrowed. Jonas had been moving crates into that room all week. Crates marked with symbols she didn't recognize. Crates her father insisted were supplies. Supplies never needed to be hidden. A chill slid beneath her ribs. She descended the balcony steps, her boots tapping the wooden planks, and crossed the yard with a measured pace. She moved as a lady was expected to move, graceful, composed, unthreatening. But her heart beat faster the closer she came to the study door. Jonas sensed her presence before he saw her. He always did. He set down the crate gently, almost reverently, before turning. "Miss Eleanor." He did not bow. He never had, even though it was expected. Harrow tolerated it only because Jonas performed his tasks with precision unmatched by anyone else. But Eleanor had always felt that his refusal meant something deeper, some unspoken understanding between him and the world that Harrow could not touch. "Jonas," she said softly, "what is in those crates?" A simple question. But Jonas's eyes flickered, just slightly, toward the door. Then toward the yard, where Finch stood watching from a distance. "It is not for you to worry about." That is not an answer. Because you would not want the truth of it. She stepped closer, lowering her voice. If my father hides something in this way, I have every right to know. Jonas remained still, but Eleanor could sense a tension in him, coiled like a rope about to snap. He was not a man easily shaken, yet something, whatever lay behind that study door, was enough to unsettle him. Finch's whistle pierced the air. Jonas lifted the crate again. I should not speak here, he murmured, almost inaudible. Not where ears do not belong to people. Eleanor exhaled, frustrated. Then speak when they aren't listening. Jonas's gaze met hers, steady, unreadable, but holding something she had never seen there before. A warning. A plea. Your father intends something he cannot undo, he whispered. Her breath caught. What does that mean? But Jonas had already turned away, carrying the crate into the shadows of the study. Finch watched her from across the yard, suspicion narrowing his eyes. She stepped back, forcing her expression into the practiced calm her father demanded. In the distance, Charles Harrow himself emerged from the barn, speaking to a visiting gentleman who had arrived without announcement. Their voices carried faintly across the yard. Harrow sharp, the visitors nervous. Must handle this before the 17th, Harrow was saying. The 17th. Eleanor's stomach tightened. Something was coming. Something everyone else feared enough to whisper about, but no one dared explain. What she did not know, what none of them yet understood, was that the events set in motion that evening would unravel the Harrow family, Mississippi society, and Eleanor's entire understanding of her world. And Jonas had already decided how far he would go when the hour arrived. The following morning arrived with a brittle coldness unusual for Mississippi in October. Frost clung to the rims of the fields, sparkling like shattered glass when the sun crept over the tree line. Eleanor wrapped her shawl tighter as she crossed the yard, her boots pressing faint prints into the thin white layer. The plantation seemed quieter than usual, too quiet as if the land itself were holding its breath. She noticed the carriage first. A dark, polished vehicle with brass trim and a crest she did not recognize. No plantation nearby owned such a carriage. No relative of hers traveled with such expense. The horses were restless, their breath steaming in the morning air. And beside the carriage stood her father, Charles Harrow, and a doctor she had met only once before, Dr. Abner Sloan from Natchez, a man with an unervingly gentle voice and eyes that never quite looked at people, only through them. Charles saw her and stiffened. Dr. Sloan turned with a polite smile that never touched his gaze. Eleanor, Charles said. You should be inside. The air is too cold. I am well, she replied. Who has come so early? A matter of business, Charles said curtly. His tone warned her not to ask more. But she noticed the way Dr. Sloan's fingers tapped his coat pocket, as though checking something inside. The men lowered their voices. Eleanor stepped behind a column, pretending to adjust her shawl. The overseers were busy directing the morning routine. No one watched her. She heard Charles first. The shipment from New Orleans must be here by the end of the week. I cannot tolerate another delay. Shipment. The same word used whenever Jonas carried one of those mysterious crates into the study. Dr. Sloan spoke next, his voice smooth but trembling beneath the surface. I assure you, Mr. Harrow, everything is on schedule. But discretion is paramount. What you requested, it will draw questions. Charles's reply came like flint striking stone. I know exactly what questions it will draw. That is why we must finish this before the 17th. There was that date again. The 17th. She repeated it silently, the number settling like a stone in her stomach. Sloan opened his coat, revealing a rolled letter sealed with deep red wax. Charles snatched it from his hand, broke the seal, scanned the contents, and immediately folded the paper sharply. Burn it, Charles ordered. Dr. Sloan hesitated. There are details you may wish to keep. I said burn it. Sloan obeyed. He crossed to the lantern by the doorway, feeding the letter into the flame. Eleanor watched as the wax softened, then curled inward, the paper blackening, crumbling, falling in ash-like fragments into the metal tray. Charles didn't take his eyes off the burning scrap, not until the last ember died. He turned to Sloan again. Now see to the crates. I want them locked inside before sundown. Crates. Again. Eleanor stepped back only moments before her father glanced toward her hiding place. She pretended to be walking toward the kitchen house, though her pulse thudded so hard she could feel it in her fingertips. She slipped inside the corridor near the back of the house, leaning against the wall to steady herself. Shipment. 17th. Locked crates. Burned letters. Secret meetings. Her father was planning something, and Jonas, Jonas was being forced to help him. As if summoned by her thoughts, she caught sight of Jonas through the kitchen window. He was lifting a crate from the wagon, one of the same sealed wooden boxes she had seen the night before, each marked with a faded symbol resembling a cross set inside a circle. A mark that was neither a plantation brand nor a shipping emblem. Something older. Something she did not understand. Jonas hefted the crate, but as he turned, his foot slipped slightly on the frosted ground. The crate tilted, and the thin slits between the boards widened just enough for Eleanor to glimpse something inside, something metallic catching the morning light. Jonas righted the crate instantly. Finch strode over. "Watch your footing. Master will have your hide if anything in those is damaged." Jonas gave no reply. But as Finch walked away, Jonas lifted his head, looking toward Eleanor's window. Their eyes met, and in his gaze she saw no fear, only resignation, as though he had already accepted a fate she did not yet understand. Later that afternoon, Eleanor found her father in his study, the air thick with cigar smoke. She lingered in the doorway. "Father," she said. Charles didn't look up. "What is it?" "I saw Dr. Sloane today." "Is someone ill?" "No." "Then what requires so many crates? And why are they locked inside your study?" He froze. The reaction was too sharp, too revealing. He set down the ledger he was holding. "You are asking questions beyond your place. I only wish to know." "You do not need to know." His voice cracked with sudden, dangerous anger. "Stay out of my affairs, Eleanor. Do you understand me?" She nodded, though not out of obedience. Out of calculation. Because she realized something he did not know. Eleanor had already seen that Jonas knew the truth. And Jonas, despite everything, had begun to warn her. What Charles could not imagine was how soon his daughter would uncover the secret he thought buried. By the 17th, everything he had built would fracture. And Jonas, silent, loyal Jonas, would no longer stand where Charles believed he belonged. Eleanor found Jonas behind the smokehouse that evening, stacking firewood in tidy, precise rows. The sun was sinking, leaving the sky a bruised violet, and the cicadas had fallen strangely silent. The plantation had a mood tonight, restless, uneasy, as if the land knew something was shifting beneath its surface. Jonas did not look up when she approached, but she knew he'd sensed her. He always did. His awareness was not the flinching alertness of a man accustomed to danger. It was deeper, more instinctive, as though he understood the world through currents others could not feel. "You spoke earlier," Eleanor said quietly. "You warned me." He placed a log onto the stack, aligning its end perfectly with the others. "I said only what you needed to hear. You said my father intends something he cannot undo." Jonas paused. His hands rested on the woodpile, fingers splayed, muscles tensed. "Because it is true." "Then tell me what it means." He straightened slowly, turning toward her. His face was calm, but his eyes, dark, steady, unreadable, held a gravity that made her breath catch. "That is not knowledge for you," he said. "I am not asking as a child," she pressed. "I ask because I saw something today. Something being burned. Something my father fears." Jonas's jaw tightened. He looked past her toward the main house, where warm light spilled from her father's windows. "Fear can make a man dangerous." "My father has always been dangerous," she whispered. "But this is something else." Jonas stepped closer, not enough to breach propriety, but enough that she could feel the quiet intensity radiating from him. He spoke low. "Miss Eleanor, if I say more, you will not sleep tonight." "Then I prefer the truth over sleep." For the first time, something flickered across his expression. Not amusement, not defiance, something like reluctant admiration. Or perhaps sorrow. He shook his head. "Not here. Not with eyes to see and ears to hear." Eleanor followed his gaze and saw Finch standing near the barn, pretending to inspect a saddle while watching Jonas from the corner of his eye. Her throat tightened. This conversation was dangerous, for both of them. "Come with me," she whispered. She turned toward the magnolia grove behind the kitchen house, where the trees thickened enough to swallow sound. Jonas hesitated only long enough to stack one last piece of wood before following her. The grove was dim, quiet, smelling faintly of sap and earth. The branches shielded them from view. Eleanor stopped beneath the broadest magnolia and faced him again. "Speak now," she said. Jonas folded his arms across his chest, not in defiance but in restraint. "If I tell you what your father is planning, there is no turning back." "I'm already past turning back." He exhaled slowly. "Your father is expecting something from New Orleans." "I know. A shipment." "Not cargo," Jonas corrected. "People." Eleanor's pulse collapsed into a cold throb. People? He has a list, Jonas said. Names of the ones he intends to buy off the ships. They are not for labor. They are not for the fields. Then what? She breathed. Jonas looked up through the magnolia leaves as though searching for strength. Not every man in the South uses slavery for cotton. The air between them thickened. Eleanor felt her stomach twist. What do you mean? She whispered. What I mean, Jonas said quietly, is that your father's business is not what you think. Those crates I carry, those letters he burns, they are records. Proof. Arrangements with men in the North and South who move people as if they are numbers on a page. She steadied herself on the tree trunk. Why would my father be involved in such a thing? Jonas's gaze softened, not with pity but with painful honesty. Because men in debt will do anything. Her breath shook. She had known her father was struggling, she'd seen the ledgers, the thinning harvest, the desperation in his temper, but she had never imagined this. And me? She asked faintly. How am I involved? Jonas's silence answered before his words did. He intends to use you, Jonas said. Her hand froze against the bark. Use me how? I do not know all of it, he said. Only that he said your name when he spoke of the 17th. Eleanor backed a step, feeling the weight of the earth shift beneath her feet. You heard this. I was meant to hear it, Jonas replied. He gives orders in front of me because he believes I am nothing. But I listen. A wind stirred through the grove, shaking loose a few early magnolia leaves. They drifted between them like pale scraps of paper. Eleanor swallowed. If there is danger, why warn me? You owe me nothing. Jonas's eyes held hers, steady, unblinking, resolute. I owe the truth, he said simply. Not devotion. Not obedience. Something older, deeper, an allegiance to morality that had survived every cruelty Harrow had inflicted. Eleanor felt something shift inside her, a sharp and terrifying clarity. My father is planning something terrible, she said. And you know it. Jonas didn't speak. You want to stop it. Still he said nothing. But silence itself was an answer. Eleanor stepped closer, lowering her voice to a whisper. Then help me. Jonas inhaled once, slow, as if weighing not just her life but his own. If I help you, he murmured, there is no safe path left. Not for either of us. Eleanor raised her chin. Then we will walk the unsafe one. Jonas closed his eyes briefly, accepting what had already become inevitable. Very well, he said. But whatever we uncover, will change everything you believe about your father. And what Eleanor did not yet know, what the land itself seemed to warn in the rustling leaves, was that the truth she sought would not save her. It would divide the world she trusted, and bind her fate to Jonas forever. The storm rolled in without warning. By nightfall, rain hammered the plantation roof with such force that it drowned out every other sound. The sky flickered with jagged streaks of white, illuminating the yard in violent bursts. Thunder cracked so hard it rattled the glass in Eleanor's bedroom window. It was the kind of storm that made the world feel suspended, held between breath and collapse. It was also the kind of storm her father despised. Charles Harrow hated anything unpredictable. And while he paced the parlor with a half-finished drink in hand, muttering about the ruined roads and delayed shipment, Eleanor knew this was her moment. Jonas's warning rang in her skull. Your father intends something he cannot undo. And the 17th. Always the 17th. She slipped from her room as the clock struck 9, the hallway dim except for the occasional flash of lightning. Each strike cast her shadow long and trembling across the wall. She felt a tremor of fear, not of what she would find, but of the possibility that she might already be too late. The study door was locked, but Eleanor had watched her father long enough to know his habits. He always hid keys in practical places, places he believed no one would notice. She reached above the door frame and felt along the edge until her fingers brushed metal. The key was cold. She hesitated, not out of doubt, but out of the uncanny weight of the moment. Once she opened this door, she would step beyond the life she had been raised to live. Beyond obedience. Beyond ignorance. She slid the key into the lock. The bolt turned with a soft click. Lightning split the sky as she pushed the door open, flooding the study in a sheet of white before plunging everything back into darkness. The air inside was stale, heavy with cigar smoke, ink, and something else. An iron scent, faint but unmistakable. Eleanor closed the door behind her and lit a candle from the matchbox on her father's desk. The small flame steadied her pulse. The study looked ordinary at first glance. Shelves of ledgers, maps, old books with cracked spines. But when she lifted the candle higher, the illusion crumbled. Newspaper clippings. Dozens of them. Pinned across the far wall like a grotesque mosaic. Missing enslaved people. Runaways never found. Bodies discovered in swamps with no names, only scars. Others taken from northern free states. Abductions disguised as disappearances. Each clipped article had a number written beside it in her father's handwriting. She stepped closer, breath trembling. A name caught her eye. Jonas, October 17th. Her throat tightened. The date was written in ink so bold it carved itself into her vision. The 17th. Jonas's name. Marked. She staggered back, gripping the desk to steady herself. Another lightning flash illuminated the room, and she saw the crates. 3 of them stacked beside the bookshelf, symbols carved into their lids. The circle. The cross. The same markings Jonas had carried all week. Her hand shook as she set the candle on the desk and reached for the nearest crate. The lid was nailed but loose. She wedged her fingers beneath the edge, prying it up just enough to peer inside. Metal glinted. Chains. But not farm chains. Not the thick, utilitarian iron used for wagons. These were thinner, more intricate, restraint cuffs with locking mechanisms she'd never seen before. They gleamed with unsettling care, polished, deliberate, crafted for human limbs rather than work. Her stomach curled. Beside them lay folded cloth, hood-like coverings, the kind used to blindfold or silence. Beneath that, a booklet covered in coded symbols. She stepped back as the truth pressed against her ribs like a tightening band. Her father was not dealing in cotton. He was dealing in bodies. In people. Not as labor. As merchandise. Eleanor drew a trembling breath, forcing herself to continue searching. She needed clarity. Proof. Answers she dreaded but could not avoid. She opened the desk drawer, neatly organized ledgers, lists of transactions, payments spanning from Natchez to New Orleans, and several northern towns she recognized from abolitionist pamphlets. Her father had connections everywhere. Then she found the letter. It was meant to be burned like the others, but Charles had missed this one tucked between ledgers. The wax seal was broken. She opened it with shaking fingers. Harrow, the subjects you purchased will arrive by the 17th. The tall one, Jonas, is essential. Do not alter the arrangement. The girl must be present. Her knees nearly gave out. The girl must be present. Her father's plan involved her. Not as a bystander, but as an ingredient. A requirement. The candle flame flickered violently as the storm intensified. Eleanor stared at the letter until the ink blurred through her tears. Miss Eleanor. Her breath stopped. Jonas stood in the doorway, half-shadowed, clothes soaked from the rain. She hadn't heard him enter. Lightning reflected off his skin, casting him in an otherworldly glow. How did you? I knew you would come here, he said quietly. She held the letter out to him with shaking hands. He intends to sell people. Kidnap others. And you, Jonas, you're marked for something on the 17th. Jonas looked at the wall of clippings. The crates. The chains. I know, he said. The simplicity of his answer shattered her. Why didn't you tell me everything? Her voice broke. Because truth is a weight, Jonas murmured. And once carried, it cannot be put down. Eleanor wiped her eyes. My father, he wants me involved. Why? Jonas's gaze met hers, steady, dark, resigned. Because your presence legitimizes the transaction. A white witness. A guarantee to the buyers. The room blurred. Eleanor clutched the desk for balance. You cannot remain here, Jonas said. Not after seeing this. And you, she whispered. What will happen to you on the 17th? Jonas exhaled slowly. Something neither of us will allow. The storm rumbled above them as if the heavens themselves agreed. Eleanor looked at the chains, the ledgers, the letter, the marked date. And for the first time in her life she understood. Her father was not simply cruel. He was constructing something monstrous. What she did not yet know, what Jonas feared most, was that the 17th was not the beginning of her father's plan. It was the deadline. The storm raged long into the night, but Eleanor scarcely heard it. She stood in the center of her father's study, the walls closing in around her, the clippings whispering their silent accusations, the crates looming like sealed coffins. Jonas remained by the door, water pooling at his feet, muscles tensed as though expecting someone to burst in at any moment. The candle sputtered, bending its flames sideways as the wind howled across the window panes. We have to leave, Eleanor whispered. Jonas didn't answer at first. He stepped forward, examining the clippings with a grim, practiced detachment, like a man viewing the ruins of something he'd long expected to fall. Leaving is not simple, he said. Not for you. Not for me especially. I don't care how difficult. The South does not forgive the things you're thinking, Jonas murmured. A white woman and an enslaved man vanish together? They will chase us from here to the edge of the world. Eleanor's throat tightened. Then we don't let them catch us. Jonas looked at her with a calm, devastating clarity. You do not understand the scale of what your father is part of. What will be unleashed if we run? She held the letter out to him again, hands trembling. He plans to sell you. To hand you over for something unspeakable. And he expects me to witness it, to make it legitimate. Jonas's jaw clenched. I knew he meant to involve you. I didn't know how deeply. Lightning flared, illuminating the room in a stark white that revealed the truth neither could escape. This house was no longer a home. It was a trap. A machine with gears turning toward the 17th. Eleanor steadied herself and walked to the desk. She opened the bottom drawer, the one her father always locked. Jonas watched her silently as she pulled out a small iron key from the ledger shelf and fitted it into the drawer's slot. Inside lay stacks of currency, rolled banknotes, and 2 leather-bound ledgers stained at the edges. These records, Eleanor whispered, they show every transaction. Every name. If the authorities saw this, my father would hang for it. Jonas shook his head. There are no authorities who will act. The men involved hold power in both states. Then we expose him elsewhere. The North. Cincinnati, New York, places where men like him can't control the laws. Jonas stepped back as though the idea itself had weight. Eleanor, if you flee with me, bounty hunters will come. Patrollers, federal marshals, and they will not question the story your father tells. She knew what he meant. Her father would claim she had been taken. That Jonas had forced her. That she had no will of her own. It was the lie men always used when a woman chose something they did not approve. I am not afraid of my father, she said. You should be, Jonas replied softly. Men who trade in people have no limit. And he will not stop until he destroys whatever he thinks you've taken from him. Eleanor closed the drawer slowly, her palm lingering on the worn leather of the ledger. Then I take something he cares about. Money? Jonas asked. No, she whispered. Evidence. She pulled the 2 ledgers free, laying them on the desk. Jonas approached cautiously, flipping one open. His eyes moved across the columns. Names, ages, destinations, coded symbols, payments sent and received. These show everything, he said. Every person he delivered. Every buyer. And every collaborator, Eleanor added. Jonas closed the ledger gently as though it contained something living. If your father discovers these missing, he will come for you first. He already will, she said. The moment he sees his study has been tampered with. Jonas's gaze drifted toward the door. Then we move before dawn. Eleanor felt heat surge beneath her skin. Fear, yes, but also a fierce determination she had never known until this moment. How far north can we go? Jonas considered. Tennessee by the 2nd day if the roads are clear. Kentucky after that. Freedom lies beyond the Ohio River. But it is not an easy crossing. And after that? After that, Jonas said, you will no longer be Eleanor Harrow. She closed the ledgers and wrapped them in cloth. What about you? He held her gaze for a moment too long. I do not know who I become once I am not someone's property. The candle wavered again. Somewhere in the house, a floorboard groaned. Eleanor flinched, clutching the wrapped ledgers to her chest. Jonas extinguished the candle with his fingers and moved toward her. We cannot leave from the front, he whispered. Finch will be watching. The patrollers ride early. We go through the woods behind the mill. Horses will draw attention. You ride. I run. I won't leave you behind. Jonas's expression softened for the briefest moment. You are not leaving me. I am choosing the ground I can move fastest on. Eleanor nodded, but something deep in her chest twisted painfully. Jonas glanced at the window where the storm was finally softening into a cold drizzle. Gather what you need. Only what you can carry. And you, she whispered. I will prepare the path. He stepped into the hallway, stopping just long enough to look back at her. Eleanor, if we do this, there is no place to return to. There is nothing here to return to, she whispered. Jonas nodded once. Then by first light, we are gone. The door shut behind him. And Eleanor, for the first time in her life, realized she had crossed the threshold between who she was expected to be and who she must become. What she did not yet know was how quickly her father would discover the missing ledgers, nor how high a price he would place on Jonas's head and hers. By the time the sun rose, the hunt would already have begun. The rain eased just before dawn, leaving the world washed in a cold, colorless light. The storm clouds had not passed. They lingered low and heavy as though waiting for something to break beneath them. Fog clung to the fields in thin rivers of white, threading through the cotton rows, blurring the edges of the land Eleanor had known all her life. It was the last morning she would ever see it as a daughter of Harrow Plantation. Inside her room, Eleanor packed with trembling hands. She took only what Jonas had instructed: a change of clothes, a shawl, a small water flask, and the 2 ledgers wrapped tightly in cloth. She hesitated before adding her mother's brooch, a tiny silver magnolia. Her mother had died when Eleanor was 14, and Charles had buried her memory so thoroughly that Eleanor sometimes felt the woman had existed only in dreams. Taking the brooch felt like stealing a ghost from this house. But she slipped it into her pocket anyway. A soft knock came at her door. She opened it to find Jonas, damp from the receding storm, a thin scrape of mud on his boots. He scanned the hallway, then stepped inside. "We have minutes," he whispered. "Finch is already stirring the yard." Eleanor tied the bundle of ledgers, her hands shaking. Jonas took it from her. "I will carry this," he said. "If we are separated, you cannot be found with it." "Separated?" she echoed. "It is possible." No reassurance, no false comfort. Jonas did not speak lies simply because they were kind. She nodded. "What do we do first?" "We leave without being seen." He opened her window. The wind blew cold across the room, carrying the smell of wet earth and chimney soot. Outside, the fog was thick enough to hide them if they moved carefully. Jonas gestured for her to climb through. She hesitated only once. Then she swung her legs over the sill and lowered herself onto the damp grass. Jonas followed silently, landing beside her with the quiet strength of someone who had lived his life making no sound unless commanded. "Stay low," he murmured. They moved through the dim garden, skirting the magnolia grove where they had spoken the night before. Eleanor's heart pounded so loud she feared Finch would hear it from across the yard. At the corner of the house, Jonas paused suddenly, his arm coming up instinctively in front of her. Voices. Finch and one of the overseers were crossing the yard, lanterns bobbing in their hands. "Master's in a temper this morning," Finch muttered. "Said he's missing some papers." Eleanor felt the blood drain from her face. "He'll find him," the overseer replied. "He always does." "Not this time," Finch said. "He's tearing apart his study. That girl of his better have stayed where she belongs." Jonas's eyes flicked to Eleanor's. She swallowed hard. The men passed. Jonas exhaled slowly. "We move now." They slipped behind the shed where Jonas had hidden a horse, Eleanor's mare, Sparrow, saddled and waiting. Jonas lifted Eleanor into the saddle with swift, practiced ease. His hands lingered only long enough to ensure her balance before he stepped away and adjusted the reins. "You ride ahead," he said. "Stay close to the tree line. And you? I run beside you until the woods. I cannot be seen on horseback." Lightning flickered again in the distance. Eleanor wished she could argue, wished she could demand he ride with her, but she knew the truth. A black man on a stolen horse was a death sentence. A black man running behind a white woman on horseback could, if spotted, still be claimed as a servant. A fragile lie, but a lie that might save his life. Jonas placed her bundle behind the saddle. "Once we reach the mill road, we go north. Do not look back." But Eleanor did look back. She looked at the house where she had spent 19 years, where she had read books in the quiet parlor, where she had listened to storms from her bedroom window, where she had prayed more times than she could count for her father's temper to soften. Now she prayed only that he wouldn't find them before they reached the woods. Jonas touched her knee lightly. "It is time." Eleanor nodded, and Sparrow moved forward with a soft snort. Jonas followed, his steps soundless on the wet ground. They cut behind the barn, then across the drying field, staying low as the fog curled around their bodies like a guiding veil. The world felt suspended, balanced on the edge of something irreversible. Halfway to the woods, Jonas stopped abruptly. "Riders," he whispered. She heard them too, hooves cracking through mud on the far side of the plantation. Finch was mounted now, riding toward the back fields. Jonas's eyes narrowed. "They are looking for you." Eleanor's breath stuttered. "Already? They know the ledgers are missing." Sparrow stamped anxiously. Eleanor tightened her grip on the reins. "What do we do?" she whispered. Jonas stepped closer to the mare, placing a hand on her shoulder. "We run," he said. He slapped the horse lightly on the flank and Sparrow surged forward. Eleanor clung to the saddle, fog parting in white shards as she broke toward the woods. Behind her, Jonas sprinted, faster than any man she had ever seen, his feet barely touching the ground, his breath even controlled. Shouts erupted behind them. Over there. The girl? Eleanor's pulse exploded. She pushed Sparrow harder, branches scraping her arms as she reached the tree line. Jonas dove into the brush, disappearing and reappearing between trunks like a shadow fleeing sunrise. They did not stop, not when Finch's whistle cut through the air, not when dogs barked from the kennels, not when the first shots fired upward in warning arcs. Eleanor didn't look back again. Not even when she heard Jonas's voice, calm, steady, too close behind her. Do not slow. Whatever happens, do not stop. And what she did not yet know, what Jonas already feared, was that their escape had begun too late. The hunt was already forming. And by nightfall, the bounty on Jonas's head would climb higher than any price the state had ever seen. By mid-morning, the fog had burned away, leaving a brittle, cloudless sky over Harrow Plantation. The sunlight exposed everything the storm had tried to hide, the churned mud, the broken branches along the woods, and the half-erased hoofprints leading north. Charles Harrow stood in the yard staring at the open window of his daughter's room, his face drained of color. His study door lay cracked on its hinges behind him, splinters scattered across the hallway floor. Finch hovered nearby, sweating despite the cool air. "They are gone," Charles said quietly. Finch swallowed. "Sir, we do not yet know." "They are gone," Charles repeated, voice curdled with something far darker than anger. "And they took the ledgers." Finch's gaze flicked toward the barn. "Jonas. And Eleanor." Charles's jaw twitched. "My own daughter, fleeing with a runaway like some backwoods heathen." Finch took a cautious step back. "What do we tell the men?" "The truth is irrelevant," Charles snapped. "We tell the story that gets results." He strode toward the porch, shoved past an overseer, and barked so loudly the workers in the field froze mid-step. "My daughter has been taken. Abducted by the Negro called Jonas." A ripple of shock moved across the yard, some genuine, some practiced for self-preservation. He raised his voice even further, as if wanting the earth itself to carry his words. "He forced her from her bed. Threatened her life. Anyone who retrieves him will receive $2,000 from my hand. Anyone who returns her will receive a pardon for any offense committed in the search." $2,000. The number dropped like a stone into a lake, and its waves spread instantly through every man present. Overseers shifted. Patrollers' eyes gleamed. Even Finch straightened as though the impossible had suddenly become attainable. Charles wasn't finished. "And if Jonas resists, kill him." He stalked back into the house before anyone could answer. Finch mounted his horse immediately, shouting orders. "Sweep the river road. Ride the mill path. We find tracks. We follow them until the soles of our boots fall off." Within minutes, 5 riders thundered from the plantation, dogs barking wildly as handlers brought out leashes. The hunt had begun. Far to the north, Jonas and Eleanor moved through the woods at a punishing pace. Sparrow's hooves slipped on damp leaves, and Jonas kept one hand on the mare's reins whenever they crossed narrow paths, steadying her with quiet, firm control. Eleanor rode with her body low to the saddle, branches brushing her hair, her breath sharp and fast. They reached the mill road by noon. The forest was thick here, tall pines rising like silent witnesses above their heads. Jonas paused, listening. "What do you hear?" Eleanor whispered. He tilted his head, eyes narrowing. "Riders. Far off, but too many for a hunting party." Eleanor gripped the reins. "Already?" They found the window. His voice remained steady, but there was a new edge beneath it. "Your father wastes nothing when anger guides him." Eleanor fought down the dread clawing at her throat. "How many do you think?" "Enough to kill me and drag you home before dusk." She felt the words like a slap. "Jonas, I will not let them kill you." "You may not have a choice," he said softly. "If they corner us." Eleanor leaned down, voice fierce. "Then we make sure they don't." Jonas looked at her, really looked. In that moment, she wasn't the plantation daughter he served. She was something else entirely, a person who had chosen him over blood, house, and legacy. He nodded once. "Then we move." They followed the narrow mill road north, shadows weaving over them as clouds passed overhead. The woods thickened, swallowing sound in a heavy silence broken only by Sparrow's uneven breathing and Jonas's steady footfalls. Every hour they stopped briefly so Jonas could check the road. He knelt, fingers touching the ground, reading the earth like scripture. "They are closer," he said each time. "Never they've lost us. Never we are safe. Always closer." By afternoon, Eleanor began to tremble, partly from exhaustion, partly from fear. Jonas noticed. Drink, he said, handing her the water flask. She sipped. You should take some. I will when you're done. But, you're right, he said. You burn more water than you know. His tone wasn't gentle, but it wasn't harsh either. It simply acknowledged reality. Eleanor drank and handed it back. Jonas took one swallow, then capped it. Come, he murmured. They reached a narrow clearing. A stream cut through the earth, shallow but fast. We cross here, Jonas said. Water hides tracks. He guided Sparrow through the stream, his boots filling with cold river water, but he didn't flinch. Eleanor shivered as her skirts soaked to the hem. On the far bank, Jonas stopped suddenly. Tracks, he whispered. Eleanor felt her spine stiffen. Fresh. He nodded. Another party crossed here not long ago. Are they looking for us? No, Jonas said. But if we keep to the main road, we will meet them by dusk. Then we won't keep to it. Jonas gave a faint, grim smile. Good. He led them off the path, deeper into the woods where the branches grew low and twisted. Traveling through this terrain was slower but safer. For now. The sun began to fall, staining the horizon crimson. The air cooled rapidly. Eleanor looked up. We need to stop soon. Jonas shook his head. Not yet. If we sleep now, they will overtake us by morning. She hesitated. And if we keep going? We gain 1 more hour. Then we go. They moved on. As the last light bled from the sky, a sound shattered the forest quiet. A distant dog's bark. Then another. Then a whistle, sharp, commanding. Eleanor's hand flew to her mouth. Jonas turned, face sharpening. They've picked up our trail. Eleanor felt her pulse explode. What do we do? Jonas stepped beside her, eyes burning with a steady fire. We do not let them find us. A branch snapped somewhere in the woods behind them. Jonas took Sparrow's reins and whispered, Run. And what Eleanor did not yet know, what Jonas already suspected, was that the first pursuit would not be the last. Charles Harrow had unleashed more than bounty hunters. He had awakened men who dealt in shadows. Men who wanted Jonas alive, and Eleanor silent. By the time they reached the Tennessee foothills, autumn had surrendered completely to winter. The air turned thin and metallic, the kind that stung the lungs with every breath. Frost clung to the pines. The earth hardened beneath Sparrow's hooves. Somewhere behind them, dogs barked in the night like distant thunder, but Jonas had learned to read distance by sound, and he knew they still had time, though not much. The world was narrowing. Every path forward colder than the last. They made camp beneath a rocky overhang, a place Jonas found by instinct alone. The wind roared above them, howling across the mountains like an ancient thing that resented their intrusion. Eleanor shivered violently despite the blanket Jonas spread around her shoulders. You should take it, she whispered. No, Jonas replied. You freeze, we die. I freeze, I run faster to warm myself. She frowned. That isn't practical? Jonas finished, a faint flicker of a smile. But true. He crouched by the small fire he'd coaxed from damp twigs. His hands moved with quiet confidence. Hands that had built fences, mended tools, hauled cotton bales heavier than most men. Eleanor had always seen Jonas as strong, but here in the wilderness she understood something deeper. Jonas was capable. Capable in ways her father feared. Capable in ways the South punished. Capable in ways that changed destinies. As the fire warmed the cave-like hollow, Eleanor's eyes drifted to the ledgers Jonas had placed carefully between 2 stones. Do you think they'll catch us? She asked. Jonas didn't look up. Do you want the truth? Yes. For every hour we stop, Jonas said, they gain 2. Eleanor's chest tightened. Then why stop at all? Because you cannot ride forever, he said gently. And because winter kills faster than any hunter. He added another branch to the fire. The light danced across his face, carving shadows along his cheekbones. You're cold, he murmured. I'm frightened, she confessed. Jonas nodded once. That is allowed. Allowed. A simple word, but to Eleanor, it felt like an opening, a space she had never been granted in her father's house. What are we running toward, Jonas? She whispered. The North? Freedom? Justice? Or just distance? He considered that for a moment. All of it. None of it. Then softly, survival first. Eleanor wrapped the blanket tighter. My father will tell the world you took me. They'll believe him. Yes. And he'll offer money to anyone who pretends to have seen us. Yes. And if they catch you? Jonas didn't answer. He didn't need to. The fire crackled. By sunrise, frost had formed on Eleanor's eyelashes. Jonas had barely slept. He'd spent the night listening, watching, predicting the hunter's routes. When she stirred, he handed her a piece of stale bread and half an apple. You need strength. And you? Already ate, Jonas lied. They moved again. The mountains steepened, forcing them through narrow passes carved between granite walls. Sparrow slipped several times, and each time Jonas steadied the mare with a quiet touch and an instinctive understanding of her fear. Eleanor watched him and knew, without question, that her father had never seen Jonas as a man, only as a tool he controlled. But here, in the harsh expanse of winter, it was Jonas who controlled whether they lived another day. By the third mountain ridge, snow began to fall, soft at first, then heavier, gathering on Eleanor's hair and eyelashes. She pulled her shawl tighter. Jonas, how far until Kentucky? By nightfall, he said. If the snow doesn't slow us. Will it? Everything slows us now. He paused suddenly, lifting his hand in warning. Eleanor's breath froze in her throat. What is it? She whispered. Jonas pointed to the snow. Tracks. She leaned forward in the saddle. Animal? No, he crouched, brushing aside a thin layer of frost. Boots. 2 pairs. Heading west. Are they searching for us? No, Jonas murmured. But if our paths cross theirs, they will become curious. Curiosity leads to questions. And questions lead to danger. Jonas nodded. We shift east. Eleanor frowned. Won't that add more time? Yes. But if we lose time? We lose less than if we meet them, he said simply. They traveled east. As the sun sank, the temperature plummeted. Eleanor's fingers went numb around the reins. Jonas walked beside her, snow crunching beneath his boots, breath rising in faint, white plumes. When she swayed in the saddle, Jonas touched her knee lightly. Stay awake. I'm trying. Good. Keep trying. But her body betrayed her. Her vision blurred. Her head dipped. Sparrow stumbled and Eleanor nearly slid off. Jonas grabbed her before she fell. We stop. But no arguments, he said. Not when you're turning blue. He lifted her down from the saddle with steady arms, holding her for a moment longer than necessary, not out of impropriety, but because her legs refused to support her. Her breath shook as the cold carved deeper into her bones. I'm sorry, she whispered. Do not apologize for being human. He led her to a hollow beneath an outcropping of rock, shielded from the wind. He built a fire with numb fingers and pulled her close enough to feel its warmth. Eleanor watched him through half-lidded eyes. You saved my life. Jonas didn't look at her. Not yet. She leaned her head against the stone wall. Will we make it, Jonas? He hesitated. And in that hesitation, Eleanor finally understood that Jonas, who had survived everything her father's world had thrown at him, was beginning to doubt their chances. Still he said only, we make it if we move at first light. She nodded, exhaustion dragging at her. Jonas added quietly, we must reach Louisville. Friends there know how to hide people like us. People like us? She murmured. Jonas met her gaze. People hunted. Thunder rumbled in the distance, not from the sky but from something else. A tremor in the earth, faint yet unmistakable. Eleanor stiffened. What was that? Jonas's eyes narrowed. He listened, and what he heard made his shoulders tighten. Horses, he whispered. Far, but following the same mountains. Eleanor's pulse raced. They're still coming? They'll come until we cross the Ohio River, Jonas said. And maybe after. He stood slowly, staring into the dark woods. And in his silence, the truth settled over them like the falling snow. They were no longer outrunning men. They were outrunning a system designed to drag them back. By the time they crossed into Kentucky, winter had hardened into something brutal. The mountains gave way to long stretches of frozen pastureland and clusters of bare trees that rattled like bones when the wind passed through them. Eleanor rode with her head bent low against the icy air. Jonas walked beside her, moving with the steady endurance of a man who had lived through worse than weather. The sky darkened early that evening, clouds heavy with snow. Jonas scanned the terrain with sharp, calculating eyes. We need shelter, he said. Eleanor's lips trembled. Where? Jonas pointed toward a tree line at the edge of a narrow clearing. There. I passed that way once before. They reached the woods as the first flakes began to fall again. The air felt thick and metallic, the world quieting into a kind of frozen stillness. Sparrow pushed through the undergrowth until the shape of a small structure appeared between the pines. A cabin. Or what had once been one. The roof sagged, half of it collapsed beneath the weight of old storms. The windows were boarded. The logs bore scars from past winters, cracks split by cold, smoothed by rain. But it still stood, like a relic clinging to its last purpose. Jonas approached slowly, one hand raised in caution. No tracks, he murmured. No smoke. No footprints in days. Eleanor hugged her arms around herself, teeth chattering. Is it safe? No place is safe, Jonas said. But this is empty. That is enough. He pushed the door open. The hinge groaned, the sound echoing through the silent woods. Inside, the air was stale, laced with a faint smell of wet timber. A collapsed chair lay in the corner. The remnants of a hearth crumbled near the back wall. A thin layer of frost coated the wooden floor. Jonas stepped inside first, testing the planks. They held. Settle the horse near the shed, he said. I will build a fire. Eleanor nodded, though her legs shook beneath her. When she returned, Jonas had already gathered fallen branches and scraped away debris from the hearth. He struck flint until a small flame snapped to life, then coaxed it into a fragile, flickering fire. Eleanor sank near the warmth, pulling her shawl close. The fire illuminated the interior in a trembling amber glow, and that was when she noticed the marks on the wall. Words carved into the wood. Names. At least 20 of them. She leaned closer, brushing frost away with trembling fingers. Jonas, she whispered. Come look. He rose, walked to her side, and followed her gaze. The names were etched in careful, deliberate strokes. Some full names, others only initials. Carter. Enosar. Bethia. John H. Jonas C. And below them, a date. October 17th. Eleanor's breath hitched. The same date, she murmured. The one beside your name in my father's study. Jonas stared at the carving, his face hardening. This place was not chosen by accident, he said. Someone used this cabin before we came. Someone who needed to stay hidden. Eleanor ran her fingers across the carved letters. Who were they? Escaped, Jonas said quietly. Taken. Missing. She looked up at him. Taken by whom? Jonas didn't answer. Instead, he walked to the far corner of the cabin, where a loose plank jutted out slightly from the floor. He knelt and pried it open. Dust rose into the air. Inside lay scraps of paper, damp, faded, some nearly dissolved. Jonas lifted one carefully. The writing was faint but readable. If you find this place, leave before he returns. He trades in shadows. He sells what cannot speak. Eleanor's stomach dropped. Her voice thinned. Does it mean my father? Jonas lowered the paper. Not just him. Men like him. Men with power. Men who do not care where a person comes from if gold is offered. Eleanor felt the cabin walls closing in. These names, these people, were taken north? North, Jonas said, or south again. Sold. Used. Hidden. The men involved are not bound by states. Lightning flickered through the cracks in the boarded window, though no storm had yet broken. Eleanor knelt beside the hole in the floor. Why mark the 17th here? Jonas exhaled slowly. Because it is the day they were collected. Her throat tightened painfully. Collected. Taken from hiding, Jonas said. Ship. Bought. Disappeared. Eleanor pressed her hand against the cold boards, as though she could feel the echoes of those who once sat trembling in this same room. All of them gone, she whispered. Jonas didn't speak. The fire crackled as snow began falling harder outside, tapping against the cabin roof like impatient fingers. Eleanor closed her eyes. These are the people my father helped move. Yes. And the ones he bought? Yes. Her breath came shallow. Jonas, your name on that list, it means he meant to send you away. To one of those places. Jonas looked into the fire, the flames reflecting in his eyes like fractured gold. I knew, he said quietly. Not everything. But enough. Why didn't you run before? He met her gaze. Because running alone is dying alone. Eleanor's throat tightened. But with me? With you, Jonas said, I had a chance. Outside the wind shifted. A faint creaking came from the trees, something like a footstep, something like the woods holding its breath. Jonas rose swiftly. Eleanor stiffened. What is it? Jonas listened. Then whispered, someone is near. Eleanor's pulse hammered. Hunters? She breathed. No, Jonas murmured. If it were hunters, the woods would not be this silent. Her skin prickled. Then who? Jonas stepped toward the door, muscles tensed, ready to defend. And Eleanor, shivering in the dim glow of the cabin, surrounded by the carved names of the lost, suddenly understood that what waited outside might not be searching for them, but returning to the place it once used. What she did not yet know was that the person approaching the cabin had been following them far longer than the bounty hunters had, and held truths that would shatter everything she thought she understood about the Harrow conspiracy. The knock came just after nightfall. 3 slow, deliberate strikes against the wooden door, too measured to be wind, too patient to be a hunter. Eleanor froze where she sat, breath halting in her throat. Jonas's hand moved instantly to the fire poker, lifting it like a weapon. The knock came again. "Who's there?" Jonas called, voice low, steady. Silence. Then a rasping voice, calm, older, carrying a strange familiarity. "Jonas Cross." Eleanor's eyes widened. Jonas stiffened. Only one man alive used that name. Jonas straightened, grip tightening around the poker. "You should not be here." Pause. Then. "You left something undone." Jonas's jaw clenched. "I left nothing undone. The man I owed is dead." "Not dead," the voice said. "Replaced." Jonas moved to the door before Eleanor could stop him. He opened it just enough to see who stood outside. An older black man stood in the snow, wrapped in a ragged coat. His beard was graying, his eyes sharp, assessing. Snowflakes collected in his hair, but he didn't seem to feel the cold. Eleanor whispered, "Who is he?" Jonas didn't answer. The man stepped forward, ignoring the tension. "I knew you'd run this way," he said. "He predicted it." "Who?" Eleanor asked. The man looked at her, really looked. His gaze was not cruel, but it was cutting, as though he was weighing her past, present, and future all at once. "Your father?" he said. Eleanor's stomach dropped. "My father sent you?" "No," the man replied. "Your father hired men who wanted Jonas. I came because I knew Jonas before your father ever owned him." Jonas's expression did not shift, but something in his stance hardened. "Why follow us?" he demanded. The man stepped past the threshold and closed the door behind him. Snow melted on his boots, dripping into small dark puddles on the wooden floor. "You are running toward the wrong place," he said. "The North will not save you. There are eyes waiting there too." Eleanor felt her chest tighten. "What do you mean, eyes?" "Your father's partners," the man said. "The ones who sent those letters. The ones who paid for those crates. The ones who marked Jonas for the 17th. Eleanor shook her head. "But the North is free." "Free soil does not mean free hands," the man said sharply. "There are men in cities like Cincinnati and Philadelphia who profit from moving people in both directions." Jonas's voice cut through the firelight. "Why warn us?" The man turned to him with an expression Eleanor almost mistook for pity. "Because you were meant to be taken alive," he said. "And she," he gestured to Eleanor, "was meant to witness your sale. That was the arrangement. That is why your father panicked when she fled with you. Her presence legitimizes the transaction." Eleanor felt her hands go cold. "No," she whispered. "I'm not part of this." "You are," the man said, "because you're a Harrow. Your signature, your presence confirms the trade. Without you, the buyers lose their proof." Jonas's shoulders tensed, not in fear but in calculation. "What is your role in this?" Jonas asked. The man sighed. "I was once part of that world. Before I escaped. Before they took everything I cared about." He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "Jonas, they want you because you can read. Because you can write. Because you know numbers. Men like your father don't tolerate intelligence that cannot be controlled." Eleanor stared at Jonas, stunned. "You can read." Jonas looked away. "I learned before I was sold." The man continued, "You think this is just about you and her father? No. It's larger. Your father is a cog. The 17th is the day all the shipments gather. You were the final piece." Eleanor pressed a hand against the cabin wall. "Why tell us? Why not take him now and earn the bounty?" The man met her gaze without flinching. "Because I don't trade in people anymore. And because what waits in Cincinnati is worse than your father." Jonas lifted the poker slightly. "If not north, then where?" "West," the man said. "Cross the frozen river in the dark. Take the ridge trail. Follow the old wagon road toward the free settlements that do not cooperate with the trade. If you reach them before the 17th, you might live." Eleanor stepped forward. "Why help us?" "Because," the man said quietly, "your father's men are minutes behind me. And if I hadn't reached you first, you'd already be dead." Jonas heard it then, a faint rumble of hooves muffled by snow. "They've arrived," he whispered. The older man moved toward the back door. "I'll lead them off. Buy you time." Eleanor grabbed his sleeve. They'll kill you. They've tried before, he said with a ghost of a smile. Not easy to kill a man who died once already. He slipped out into the storm. Jonas turned to Eleanor, voice sharp with urgency. We leave now. She grabbed the ledgers, her shawl, the blanket, anything she could hold. Jonas kicked dirt over the fire, plunging the cabin into near darkness. Stay behind me. Outside, shouts erupted. Tracks. Fresh tracks. Light inside, someone was here. Spread out. Jonas pulled Eleanor toward the trees. Snow swallowed their footsteps. The wind tore through the branches like a warning. A gunshot cracked through the night. Eleanor gasped. Jonas didn't stop. Run. They stumbled through the dark woods, Sparrow's reins in Jonas's hand, Eleanor gripping his coat. Jonas, who was he? She cried. A man who survived what your father wants to become. More voices behind them. Dogs barking. The hunters closing in. Eleanor tripped on a root. Jonas caught her, yanking her upright. Keep moving. Branches whipped her face. Snow blinded her. The forest roared with pursuit. And then a cliff edge. A frozen river below. Eleanor's breath stopped. Jonas, we can't. We jump. What? Jonas looked back at the torches emerging through the trees. It's the river or Harrow. Eleanor stared at him, her heart pounding violently. Jonas squeezed her hand once, firm, steady. Trust me. And together, with the hunters' shouts rising behind them, they leapt into the darkness. What Eleanor did not yet know, what Jonas knew would be carved into history if they survived, was that the river would not kill them. But what waited on the other side might. The river swallowed them whole. For one impossible, breathless moment, Eleanor felt nothing. No cold, no sound, no pain. Only weightlessness. Then the world struck her all at once. Freezing water crushing her chest, darkness folding around her, Jonas's hand gripping her wrist like an anchor in the void. She surfaced with a gasp sharp enough to slice her lungs. Snowflakes hit her face. The current tore at her limbs. Jonas surfaced beside her, pulling Sparrow's reins, the mare kicking wildly against the water. Hold to me, Jonas shouted. Eleanor clung to his shoulder, her teeth chattering so violently she could barely breathe. The current carried them further downstream, away from the torches, away from the voices screaming their names. Jonas kicked hard, angling his body toward the far bank. Do not let go, Eleanor. She didn't. They hit the opposite shore with bruising force. Jonas pulled her onto the ice, then dragged Sparrow out by the bridle until the mare finally scrambled onto solid ground, trembling. For a moment, everything was quiet again. The hunters' voices dimmed on the far side. No torches crossed the river. No dogs dared step into the frozen water. Jonas leaned over Eleanor, breath visible in harsh white bursts. We must move. Eleanor couldn't speak. She could barely feel her hands. Jonas gathered her into his arms and began walking, carrying her toward the sheltering trees on the western bank. Sparrow followed limping, steam rising from her soaked coat. Behind them, the river erased their tracks. The next days blurred into survival. Eleanor drifted in and out of consciousness, fever taking root in her bones. Jonas built fires, carried her when she couldn't stand, melted snow for water, rationed the last of their food. He stitched a gash on her leg with thread ripped from his own coat. He wrapped her in blankets until her skin warmed. Once, she woke to find him leaning against a tree, eyes closed, lips moving in silent prayer, something she had never seen him do before. Jonas, she whispered. His eyes opened slowly. You live. Because of you. Jonas didn't answer. His expression held exhaustion, relief, and something unspoken. After nearly a week, Eleanor's fever broke. She could sit, she could speak, she could walk a few steps without collapsing. Jonas watched her closely, always listening, always ready to disappear into the forest at the slightest sound. Where do we go now? She asked once her voice steadied. Jonas looked north. Not to Cincinnati. Not anymore. Because of what the man said? Yes. Then where? Jonas studied the horizon as though reading a map written in the clouds. There are free settlements further west. Hidden communities. They take in runaways. They will take us. And the ledgers? We keep them, Jonas said, until someone worthy of truth finds them. Eleanor nodded, though fear still clawed at her ribs. Will my father keep searching? For a while, Jonas said. But the river will confuse them. And the mountains will swallow their trail. Will they give up? Jonas didn't answer. Because he knew men like Charles Harrow never gave up. Not when pride, money, and rage stitched their world together. 6 months later. The snow melted early that spring and the river swelled again, carrying branches, silt, and secrets downstream. In early April, a group of local farmers traveling west of Louisville discovered the old cabin half buried in thawing mud. It looked abandoned, roof caving in, walls darkened with moisture. But something felt strange about it. The farmers entered cautiously, boots crunching over frozen debris. Inside, the fire pit still held remnants of charred wood. Near the hearth lay a wool blanket, stiff with dried mud. A small pile of stones marked where someone had attempted to dry wet clothing. And on the wall, beneath 6 months of frost, names carved into the wood. The men exchanged uneasy glances. Someone was hiding here, one muttered. Recently? No, not exactly. But not long before winter ended. They searched the cabin further. One man pried up the loose floorboard and froze. Boys, come look. Inside lay a small wooden box wrapped in canvas. The farmers exchanged looks, then lifted the lid. Inside the box were a silver magnolia brooch, a strip of cloth torn from a woman's dress, a leather strap from a horse bridle, and a folded page, damp at the edges but still legible. The page contained a name, Eleanor Harrow. The men stared at each other in stunned silence. Harrow, one whispered. From Mississippi? What would a plantation daughter be doing out here? A second man unfolded the page further and discovered something else, written in hurried script. If found, do not return this to Charles Harrow. He is not who he pretends to be. The men exchanged another look, each reading the fear behind the words. A third man stepped outside, scanning the woods. Tracks go nowhere. Snow wiped everything clean. What do we tell the sheriff? Someone asked. The truth, another replied. But the truth was already fractured. Because not far from the cabin, beyond the ridge, 2 sets of footprints had once continued into the woods, side by side, before the thaw erased them completely. Rumors spread quickly through the nearby towns. Some claimed a white woman and a tall black man had been seen crossing the river by lamplight in February. Some said the woman was sick, the man carrying her. Others whispered that the pair had died in the mountains, frozen in each other's arms. A few believed they had reached the free settlements. And one old farmer swore he saw 2 figures walking west at dawn, hands intertwined, silhouettes fading into the pale morning light. But there were no bodies, no graves, no proof, only the cabin, the brooch, the carved names, and the question that haunted every man who'd heard the story. Had Eleanor Harrow escaped her father? Or had the North swallowed her the same way the South tried to? What no one knew, not the farmers, not the sheriff, not the Harrow family, was that the truth was still moving, still breathing, still building a legacy far beyond the river. A legacy written in footsteps the thaw had erased, but history had not. Spring crept slowly across the frontier lands that year, its warmth hesitant, as if unsure where it belonged in a world still scarred by winter. The Harrow name, carried north on rumors and scattered letters, stirred unrest in places where men preferred their secrets buried. That April, whispers of a plantation daughter and an enslaved man fleeing together seeped into abolitionist safe houses, river towns, taverns, and church basements. But concrete truth remained scarce. Truth in that era traveled more slowly than lies. And the lies Charles Harrow spread reached Cincinnati long before any evidence did. In Mississippi, Charles's rage became legend. He offered a reward so large that newspapers printed it twice just to confirm there was no mistake. $2,000 for the enslaved man Jonas. $500 for the safe recovery of his daughter Eleanor. Every town between Vicksburg and Nashville saw his notices plastered on post office walls. Charles insisted publicly that his daughter had been abducted, forced into flight by a cunning runaway. Privately, he feared something far worse. Eleanor had taken the ledgers. The ledgers that could sink not only him, but every man who had ever signed a coded agreement, purchased a human body through shadow channels, or stood in candlelit warehouses moving people as if they were freight. Those ledgers were a confession the South could not afford, and the North did not want. 6 months after the cabin's discovery, a traveling minister from Indiana stopped at a small settlement near the edge of the Ohio frontier. He carried with him a worn journal he claimed to have found near the river, its pages waterlogged but not completely ruined. Inside the journal were fragments of a woman's handwriting. Elegant, determined, educated. Her words were faint but decipherable. Father believes fear is a chain no one can break. Jonas believes chains break themselves if enough hands pull. I do not know which of them is right. I only know I must choose one of their worlds before the 17th finds us. Another entry read, "If we continue west, there are settlements that hide people whose names men tried to erase. Jonas knows the signs carved in the trees. I trust him more than I trust myself. I fear what waits in Cincinnati. I fear even more what waits behind us." No signature. But the minister didn't need one. The handwriting matched the name written in the cabin. Eleanor Harrow. He delivered the journal to a small abolitionist circle near Louisville. They debated whether to believe it. Some did. Some refused. Stories of white women fleeing with enslaved men were rare, unbelievable, scandalous. But the journal felt real, too raw, too intimate to fabricate. Still, a question lingered. If the journal had been found near the river, where were Eleanor and Jonas? 4 years afterward, sightings surfaced like half-remembered dreams. A merchant in Illinois swore he'd seen a tall black man teaching letters to a group of children in a hidden clearing. A midwife near St. Louis spoke of a pale young woman with intelligent eyes helping deliver infants in secret safe houses, always arriving at night, always leaving by dawn. A trapper traveling west toward Kansas Territory claimed 2 strangers warned him of a patrol raid hours before it happened. They vanished into the trees before he could ask their names. Most dismissed these accounts as stories told around fires, tales embellished by winter nights and wandering imaginations. But one record, found in a Quaker meeting house ledger, stood apart from rumor. Dated 1856, it listed the names of those who assisted in moving fugitives along an unofficial road of freedom. Most names were initials, but 2 stood out. J.C. H. No explanation. No full names. Only the letters. Yet to anyone who had ever heard the Harrow tale, the meaning was unmistakable. Back in Mississippi, Charles Harrow's empire rotted from the inside. By 1857, whispers of investigation reached his ears. Men who had once stood beside him began burning their own records, severing ties, and denying any knowledge of coded trades or shadow shipments. Charles fell ill that winter, not of disease but of fear. Fear of exposure. Fear of the 17th. Fear of the truth he tried to bury. He died before any law reached him. Some said it was his heart. Others whispered it was guilt. But a few, those who knew what men willing to trade in human shadows were capable of, believed something simpler. He died of being hunted by the very darkness he helped create. In 1862, during the turmoil of the Civil War, Union soldiers came across an abandoned wagon near the Missouri woods. Inside were papers, scorched around the edges but readable. Among them, a page of names. All of them people once listed as missing. All of them crossed out. And beside one name, Jonas, someone had written a single sentence. Not taken. Escaped into legend. The soldiers dismissed it as folklore. A story for campfire whispers. But one man, a chaplain who had studied old abolitionist routes, kept the page. He showed it to a historian decades later. The historian shook his head. Legend or not, he said, someone wanted his story told. Whether Eleanor and Jonas lived out their days in the far western settlements, or crossed into Canada, or died beneath an unmarked tree in a forgotten forest, no record confirms. But traces of them endure. A carved magnolia found on a wooden beam of an abandoned safe house. A ledger fragment hidden in a museum drawer, never publicly displayed. A whispered tale among elders of a pale woman and a dark-skinned man guiding families through woods where no map existed. A child's surname appearing in Kansas records with no parent listed, only the initials E.H. The truth remains elusive. But the omniscient truth, whispered through time, is this. They were not hunted down. They were not silenced. They did not vanish. They transformed. Into rumor. Into hope. Into the myth of 2 souls who outran an empire built on chains. And left behind a trail of broken links in their wake. Before history was ready to remember them, they had already carved themselves into it. What do you think truly happened to Eleanor Harrow and Jonas after they crossed that frozen river? Did they reach the settlements in the far west? Did they become the silent guides whispered about in abolitionist stories? Or did their names dissolve into the shadows of history by choice, not by force? Tell me your theory in the comments below. If you want more dark historical mysteries like this, stories that pull forgotten voices from the edges of history and force us to confront the truths our ancestors tried to bury, make sure you subscribe to the Slave Rebellion. Hit the notification bell so you never miss a tale that blurs the line between legend and nightmare. And if this story moved you, challenged you, or kept you on the edge until the final word, share it with someone who believes the past is finished. Some stories are still walking. Some truths refuse to stay silent. See you in the next video.